Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show built entirely around your quest for knowledge. We take complex, layered source material articles, research, historical texts, and extract the most crucial nuggets of insight, giving you a comprehensive shortcut to being truly well-informed.
Today, we are answering a powerful request from a learner seeking to understand some really deep truths concerning justice, the staggering weight of treachery, and, the ultimate guarantee of divine stability.
That's right. Our mission today is to perform a comprehensive, really detailed exploration of one of King David's most dramatic and, I think, emotionally charged compositions, Psalm 52.
It really is. This isn't just some ancient poem. It feels like a living document, one that confronts the very nature of evil head-on.
Exactly. We are unpacking this powerful psalm, which was written in the immediate shadow of a massive, just an unthinkable betrayal, and we're going to be extracting timeless wisdom from it that is, frankly, startlingly relevant to our modern struggles with deceit, slander, and misplaced power.
And we should be clear, we are committed to thoroughly exploring this profound text. We're drawing specifically from the in-depth research and the application framework that was supplied by the You Need Faith in Jesus team.
Yeah, they provided the foundational material for this entire discussion, and it's really rich stuff.
So to really appreciate the emotional and theological weight of Psalm 52, we absolutely cannot skip the history. We have to introduce the dramatic context that frames every single one of David's words.
Okay, so where do we start with that?
Well, the title of the psalm itself. The titles often contain the most important interpretive clues, and this one really sets the scene. It says, "To the chief musician, Mashil, a psalm of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said unto him, David is come to the house of Ahimelech."
Okay, so let's unpack that crucial setup, because that title really explains everything. David is running for his life.
Right.
He's desperately fleeing from King Saul, who at this point is just consumed by a violent paranoid jealousy. David is starving, he's alone, and he's looking for refuge, for aid, in a place called Nob.
Which was the designated city of the priests. And who does he run into there? He encounters Ahimelech, the high priest.
And Ahimelech, he shows this great compassion. He seems to believe David is acting on some kind of secret mission for Saul.
Yeah, he's a little deceived, but his heart is in the right place. He gives David what he desperately needs, some food, the hallowed bread, and really significantly, he gives him the sword of Goliath.
Ah, the very soul?
The very one, the great trophy David had claimed years earlier. So Ahimelech is extending kindness, maybe even spiritual aid, to a man he believes is still serving the king.
But this quiet, necessary act of compassion, it wasn't private.
Yeah.
It was witnessed. And it was witnessed by one individual who would turn that information into, a global tragedy for Israel.
Doeg the Edomite.
Doeg the Edomite. And this detail is key. Doeg was not an Israelite. He was a foreigner, specifically designated as the chief of Saul's herdsmen. So he's positioned close to power.
Very close. And he's just an observer of this whole transaction between David and the high priest.
So what does he do?
Well, Doeg then takes this information, this act of priestly kindness, and he reports it directly to King Saul.
Who is, of course, in the worst possible state of mind to receive this kind of news.
Exactly. Saul's mind is clouded by this deep, dangerous suspicion, and he interprets this act of assistance as outright treason. He becomes convinced that Ahimelech and the entire priestly class are actively conspiring with David to overthrow him.
And here's where the dramatic horror of the story truly begins. Saul orders the execution of all the priests of the Lord at Nob. But what happens next is just a chilling detail, and it speaks volumes about moral conscience.
It really does. His own Israelite soldiers, even his most loyal men, trained killers, they refused.
They refused to carry out such a terrible sacrilegious command.
Yeah. Killing the priests of God was an atrocity that was just too far, even for them.
But
Doeg, the foreigner, the man David is about to address in this psalm, he stepped forward. And the source material we have is very specific about the devastating, terrifying scale of his wicked action. He personally slaughtered 85 priests.
85. All of them wearing the linen ephod, which is a direct affront to the spiritual leadership of Israel.
But it gets worse.
He does. His wickedness didn't stop with the men of God. Once he began, he carried the king's wrath to its absolute horrifying extreme. Doeg executed the entire city of Nob.
The whole city. The text tells us he put to the sword men, women, children, and even the animals, the cattle, donkeys, and sheep. It was a complete annihilation.
An act of genocide, really, spurred by a single treacherous and deceitful report.
So the massacre at Nob is one of the darkest events in the book of 1 Samuel.
Hmm.
And David writes Psalm 52 as a direct response to that shocking evil and those treacherous words.
So he's not just, venting his frustration. He's processing this betrayal as a fundamental moral and spiritual conflict.
Exactly. It's the ultimate clash between momentary human wickedness and the eternal, unshakable nature of God.
The emotional weight of that betrayal and just the sheer scale of the collateral damage, it must have been crushing for David.
Oh, absolutely.
Knowing that his need for aid inadvertently led to the slaughter of 85 priests in an entire town. I mean, how does a man process that level of trauma and potential guilt?
Well, he turns to God, and he writes this psalm. So let's dive into section 1, where David immediately confronts the anatomy of this kind of wicked boasting and the frightening power of the tongue. This covers verses 1 through 4.
Okay, let's do it. We begin with David's direct confrontation. It's a rhetorical challenge thrown right at Doeg, the man who believed himself powerful. Here is Psalm 52, verse 1 in its entirety.
Okay.
Why boastest thou thyself in mischief, O mighty man? The goodness of God endureth continually. That's Psalm 52, verse 1 from the King James Version.
And that is a rhetorical masterstroke. David is speaking directly to Doeg, who had just exercised this immense destructive power. Doeg felt validated.
Right. He carried out a brutal royal order that the king's own men rejected. He must have felt celebrated by Saul for his zeal, for his obedience.
In that moment, he truly felt like a mighty man.
And the irony is so sharp, isn't it? David is questioning the entire foundation of that pride. Why would you find glory? Why would you boast in causing such profound wickedness?
Your perceived strength was only displayed in a single devastating act of mischief, which in this King James context means something actively malicious, actively destructive. It was fleeting.
And worse than fleeting, it was destructive.
It was. And David immediately contrasts that destructive momentary power with the foundational reality of the entire cosmos, God's goodness. He places them side by side as these two opposing forces in the universe.
Doeg's mischief lasts for a moment.
But the goodness of God endureth continually. That goodness is constant, it's permanent, it is unending.
That contrast is so essential. David is basically saying, look at your foundation, Doeg. It's a momentary flicker of malicious power bought with blood. Now, look at God's foundation. It is constant, it is enduring, and it's the ultimate source of all reality.
Precisely. And if we look at human power, especially ruthless, wicked power, it is so transient and hollow. Any strength we might derive outside of God's constant character is utterly empty. It's a foundationless boast that is just destined for oblivion.
We see this theme repeated throughout Scripture. In fact, the source material directs us to the prophetic warning in Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 23.
Right, from the King James Version it says, Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might, neither let the rich man glory in his riches.
The focus isn't on the thing itself, is it? It's the glory we place in it, the misplaced trust.
Doeg boasted in his might, his ruthlessness, his ability to execute that slaughter, his elevated position under Saul. But David immediately shifts the listener's focus to the only true and lasting source of strength.
So if our confidence rests on anything other than the continual goodness of God, our talent, our wealth, our influence, our ability to control people, we are building on that same shaky foundation that Doeg used.
And this brings us to a really crucial point of application. The research framework from the You Need Faith in Jesus team emphasizes that this has to trigger some profound self-reflection in us.
We have to sincerely check our own hearts for that same type of pride. Do we, in our modern context, maybe subtly, find satisfaction in exercising power over others?
Do we celebrate when an adversary fails? Do we relish some form of organizational or maybe even digital mischief?
Our lasting confidence, our true boast, can only be found in the continual goodness of God, which is accessed through continuous fellowship with Him.
The moment we start deriving our sense of mightiness from our own cleverness or our destructive capacity, we've entered Doeg's territory.
Which leads us directly to the first practical step drawn from our source material. This is action step 1. Initiate a daily evaluation of where you genuinely seek your satisfaction. Do you seek it in destructive power, in temporal human achievements that are so fleeting? Or is your ultimate satisfaction truly rooted in the constant, stable goodness of God?
You have to actively examine what makes you feel mighty and then test that source against the divine standard of enduring goodness.
So, having confronted Doeg's misplaced boasting, David now zooms in on the specific instrument of the treachery.
Yeah, the weapon that actually preceded the sword that was used at Nob.
Let's read Psalm 52, verse 2. It says, Thy tongue deviseth mischiefs, like a sharp razor working deceitfully. That's Psalm 52, verse 2 in the KJV.
Notice the progression here. The massacre at Nob. It began not with an ambush, but with speech,
It was a slanderous report.
a piece of verbal wickedness. And they make sure we understand the premeditation that was involved. His tongue deviseth mischiefs. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was planned, it was plotted, and it was delivered with the conscious intent of achieving the most destructive outcome possible.
Which was the annihilation of the priests. You know, I find the imagery of the sharp razor incredibly chilling, especially when you contrast it with, say, a club or a spear. Why a razor?
Well, a razor cuts deeply. It cuts cleanly and often without immediate noise or pain. It's precise.
And Doeg's deceitful report was precise and deadly. It was delivered smoothly to Saul, seeming maybe innocuous on the surface, while completely hiding the wicked, homicidal intent that was in his heart.
It's a perfect metaphor for treachery, isn't it?
Mm.
His work was deceitful because he presented his report not as malice toward the priests or David, but probably as simple virtuous loyalty to his king.
He disguised the razor cut as an act of service.
Yes, masking the destructive malice under the cloak of political expediency.
And that reveals a timeless truth about slander and gossip. The most damaging words, they often masquerade as concern or as necessary disclosure or, as righteous indignation.
But if you look underneath,
You find the sharp, deceitful razor.
in this destructive potential of the tongue, it's a warning echoed across the entire Bible. The research framework leads us immediately to the New Testament clarity on this, which is found in James chapter 3, verse 6.
That's a powerful one. From the King James Version it says, "And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell."
That is profound and terrifying. If David saw Doeg's tongue as a precise, deceitful razor, James elevates it to a full-blown fire.
Right, setting the entire body and the world ablaze with moral iniquity. It can cause immense, irreparable damage to careers, reputations, relationships, and even lives, just as it did at Nob.
This is a solemn warning to us, especially in an age where we communicate more instantly and more broadly than ever before. The source material really emphasizes that we must actively guard our speech against this razor-like destruction.
This isn't about being quiet, though.
No, not at all. It's about being deliberate and intentional with our words.
So how do we operationalize that intentionality? This brings us to action step 2. Resolve to be intentional about avoiding gossip, slander, and even subtle misrepresentations.
Think about the modern equivalents of the sharp razor, that passive-aggressive email you send, the carefully crafted anonymous comment you post online, or the workplace rumor you share out of concern.
Right. We have to make a conscious decision that our speech will be used for building up and for fostering life, rather than for cutting people down or spreading destructive half-truths.
So David now moves past the instrument, the tongue, to the darkest aspect of it all, the root, the man's heart.
We look at verse 3, where David gives this stunning diagnosis of Doeg's soul. He says, "Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather than to speak righteousness." Selah. That's Psalm 52, verse 3, KJV.
This diagnosis is foundational to understanding human evil. David isn't just saying Doeg did evil. He says Doeg loved evil.
His entire moral compass was inverted,
Completely. He had a fundamental preference for lying rather than to speak righteousness.
which means he wasn't just, performing a duty for Saul under duress. He derived genuine internal pleasure from the unrighteous act.
He is the biblical picture of a fallen nature that is fully bent toward wickedness, where the good is rejected and the evil is genuinely embraced. It's a terrifying state, a person who actively finds joy in destruction.
And that placement of Selah there is so powerful.
It's a pause. David intentionally invites the listener. He invites you to stop and reflect deeply on this moral inversion.
A human being who prefers darkness over light, who loves lies more than truth. It's an acknowledgement of the gravity of that spiritual condition.
In this preference for darkness, it echoes the New Testament understanding of spiritual resistance to light. We can connect this directly to Jesus' own words in John chapter 3, verse 19.
Right, in the KJV it says, "And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil."
Doeg loved the darkness of evil and lies because it perfectly suited his wicked heart. And, well, it gave him justification for his unrestrained cruelty.
This really forces us, as believers today, to look inward. Where do we find our pleasure? If we consume media, entertainment, or even conversation that celebrates destruction or slander or malice, we have to question if we're subtly developing an affection for the darkness that David describes.
And that leads us straight into verse 4, which continues this theme of destructive pleasure.
Psalm 52, verse 4 says, "Thou lovest all devouring words, O thou deceitful tongue."
Devouring words. That is such a visceral, powerful phrase. It emphasizes the man's profound pleasure in the total ruin of others.
These are words that consume, that swallow up, that annihilate lives and reputations.
Just as Doeg's words led to the consumption and annihilation of Nob, he didn't just speak lies, he loved the destructive force they unleashed.
We see this connection between the tongue and destruction highlighted elsewhere. Proverbs 12, verse 18 from the KJV, it provides this really clear dichotomy.
It says, "There is that speaketh like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health."
And Doeg's tongue was clearly a sword, piercing and annihilating everything it touched. The path of faith, then, is to cultivate a tongue that brings health, healing, and life.
The application insights drawn from the source material are challenging here. We are called to be intentional agents of grace, speaking life into situations, even when we're surrounded by the digital equivalent of devouring words.
So we have to actively contrast the destructive rhetoric that dominates our culture online and offline by speaking words that reflect the life-giving nature of God.
And achieving that kind of transformation, that requires deep spiritual work. Therefore, action step 3 directs us to petition the Holy Spirit to actively search our hearts.
We need to reveal any hidden affection for worldly destructive things, the darkness over God's pure righteousness.
And this allows our desires to be transformed through repentance and faith, so that we can genuinely learn to love good more than evil.
So after diagnosing the disease of Doeg's heart and the destructive potential of his tongue, David then moves to the ultimate inevitable outcome. This is section 2, the certainty of divine justice.
This is David's fearless declaration of confidence in the righteous judgment of God.
Let's read Psalm 52, verse 5, and let's pay close attention to the finality of the language here. It says, "God shall likewise destroy thee forever. He shall take thee away, and pluck thee out of thy dwelling place, and root thee out of the land of the living." Selah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's Psalm 52, verse 5, KJV.
And this is not a personal curse or a simple wish for revenge. I mean, that would be the natural human reaction to witnessing the scale of the Nob massacre.
Right.
But this is David issuing a confident theological declaration. He is resting in the absolute conviction of God's righteous judgment, and the destruction is absolute. It is forever.
What makes this verse so profound is David's use of 3 distinct, vivid, and escalating images. They're drawn from ancient agricultural and domestic life, and they describe the irreversible nature of this judgment.
It moves from symbol removal to utter permanent eradication.
So first, God will take thee away.
Right. And this is the image of just grabbing an unwanted object and snatching it up. It's immediate and decisive removal, perhaps snatching Doeg away from the fleeting protection of King Saul's court.
And second, God will pluck thee out of thy dwelling place.
Think about life in a desert or a field environment. A dwelling place was often a tent, secured by ropes and pegs. To pluck out a tent peg means the entire structure loses its stability.
The person is permanently removed from their position and their security.
It signifies not just removal, but dispossession. Doeg's status, his political stability, his dwelling place in Saul's trust is completely undone.
And then there's the third, the most definitive and chilling image, to root thee out of the land of the living.
And this is the complete and permanent eradication of a dead or worthless tree. You don't just chop it down. You dig up every single last root.
It signifies a permanent end, with no possibility of returning or sprouting again or leaving a legacy. It is just utter destruction from the biological and moral landscape.
And this powerful guaranteed judgment, it provides deep comfort to those who, like David, witness pervasive evil seeming to triumph in the immediate moment. It reminds us of Jesus' parallel teaching in Matthew chapter 15, verse 13.
From the KJV that reads, "But he answered and said, Every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up."
Doeg the Edomite was a plant of pure, self-willed evil, rooted in malice and sustained by lies. And David's holy confidence is that such a destructive plant is destined for total, irreversible removal by the perfectly righteous God.
The implication for you, the listener, is just foundational to faith. Sin has ultimate inevitable consequences.
While God's mercy is boundless with those who turn to him in repentance, we must never confuse his mercy with apathy toward injustice. He is a perfectly just judge who guarantees that the temporary prosperity of the wicked is indeed temporary.
So what does this certainty of justice mean for our daily life when we see injustice thriving on the news or in our communities right now?
Well, it gives us a necessary holy confidence that evil will not ultimately prevail. It frees us from the soul-crushing burden of needing immediate personal vengeance.
We can trust God to settle all accounts perfectly and finally.
And that pause, that Selah at the end of verse 5, is perhaps the most spiritually relieving pause in the entire psalm. It invites us to cease fretting, to rest in the finality of divine judgment, and to trust that even though the roots of evil seem deep now, they are on borrowed time.
So building directly on that profound assurance of final judgment, David now turns his attention to the community of faith, those who stand on the side of enduring goodness.
Right. How should they respond when they finally see the wicked man overthrown and rooted out? This brings us to section 3, the righteous response and misplaced trust.
David describes a reaction that sounds a little contradictory, beginning with verse 6. Let's read the full verse.
Okay.
The righteous also shall see and fear and shall laugh at him. That's Psalm 52, verse 6 in the KJV.
Fear and laughter. It's an unexpected pairing. When the righteous witness divine justice, they first see and fear.
And this isn't a terrorized fear of punishment because they are the righteous. It's a deep reverential awe for God's overwhelming holiness and power.
They recognize the incredible severity of sin and the seriousness with which God executes justice, and it prompts self-examination.
And then they shall laugh at him.
And this is absolutely critical to interpret correctly. It is not malicious gloating.
No.
It is a laugh of relief, of vindication, and the recognition of the utter catastrophic folly of the wicked man's path. They are laughing at the defeated strategy, the ridiculousness of choosing fleeting power over eternal God.
It's that moment when the curtain is finally pulled back on Doeg's temporary pompous power, revealing it to be nothing but smoke.
Yes, the righteous recognize how utterly ridiculous his boast truly was compared to the continual, enduring goodness of God that we talked about earlier. It is a celebration of perfect justice served and righteousness vindicated.
This reaction reminds the righteous that their faith was justified. Their patience in waiting for God's timing was the correct, wise choice, validated by the spectacle of the wicked man's ruin.
So, having witnessed Doeg's downfall, the righteous then deliver the final pronouncement, identifying the fatal flaw that caused his ruin in verse 7. This is the core diagnosis of the wicked life.
Let's look at this verse in full. It's Psalm 52, verse 7.
From the King James Version it says, "Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches, and strengthened himself in his wickedness."
This verse is so powerful because it gets to the spiritual root of the failure. The righteous will point out Doeg's core, catastrophic mistake. He made not God his strength.
He actively chose to reject the true source of stability and enduring power.
So instead, where did he place his total confidence?
Well, he relied on two things. First, his material wealth, the abundance of his riches. But more importantly, his political capital and his position of influence within Saul's court.
Right. Doeg was the chief of the herdsmen. He had status and access.
And second, he strengthened himself in his wickedness. And that's chilling. He uses political ruthlessness, his capacity for evil, and his willingness to perform atrocities as his foundation for security and power.
His wicked actions became his strategy, his bank account, and his shield.
His riches, his high position, and his ruthless cunning. They offered a seductive but utterly false foundation. They were sand.
And they failed him completely when divine justice arrived.
The prosperity of the wicked is always built on a foundation that cannot withstand the eternal scrutiny of God.
This ancient wisdom is reinforced by Proverbs chapter 10, verse 2 in the KJV. It says, "Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death."
Doeg's wickedness brought him temporary favor and perhaps temporary wealth, but it led to ultimate eternal ruin. The profit margin on evil is zero.
This section demands serious self-reflection today. The application insights of the source material supplied by the You Need Faith in Jesus team emphasize that we have to constantly evaluate our own sources of security.
We live in a society that reveres wealth and status and shrewdness.
So we have to ask, is my ultimate strength truly derived from God? Or is my reliance secretly vested in my ability to manipulate the stock market, my extensive savings account, my professional reputation, or my capacity to verbally destroy my competitors?
If we rely on those temporal things for our ultimate security, we are repeating Doeg's core fatal mistake. We must actively shift that reliance, recognizing that everything built on human power is destined to be plucked out.
And this brings us to action step 4, which is a highly practical directive derived from the material we studied.
Right.
Identify 3 key areas where you currently place trust. It could be your job security, your financial portfolio, your influential network, or a specific ability you pride yourself on. Now, intentionally shift that reliance to God, acknowledging the temporary nature of those things and making Him your only true, enduring strength.
That shift from self-reliance to God-reliance is a central, recurring discipline in the life of faith.
So now we arrive at this glorious and profound contrast that defines the believer's destiny.
Yeah, after thoroughly describing the rooted-out destruction of the wicked, David shifts his focus entirely to his own identity and his future security, providing the model for every believer who is facing injustice. This is section 4, covering stability, mercy, and the vow of faith.
David presents his identity in verse 8 in stark opposition to Doeg. He says, "But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever." That's Psalm 52, verse 8 from the KJV.
This imagery is the complete antithesis of Doeg, the man who will be violently rooted out of the land of the living. David, the persecuted, betrayed refugee, sees himself as a green olive tree.
So why the olive tree?
In that culture, the olive tree was the quintessential symbol of stability, of profound fruitfulness, long life, and enduring value. It represented oil, light, sustenance.
And the word green is crucial. It means thriving, vibrant, and continually alive. So despite being on the run and betrayed by Doeg, David maintains his spiritual vitality.
But the real stability is found in the location. David is securely planted in the house of God.
Which symbolizes a place of continuous fellowship, divine presence, and spiritual nourishment.
Exactly. His stability is not based on his ability to defeat Saul or outwit Doeg. It is rooted in his continuous connection to God.
And the source of that stability is his continuous trust in the mercy of God. While Doeg trusted in his riches and wickedness, David trusts entirely in God's undeserved favor and covenant faithfulness.
And note the duration. This trust is not temporary. It is forever and ever.
You know, think about the olive tree's roots. They go deep, sometimes 20 feet deep, which enables the tree to survive severe droughts, wars, decades of changing political climates.
That resilient root system is the perfect image of David's faith. Deep, tenacious, unshakable, because it is rooted in the unchanging mercy of God.
The prophet Hosea picks up on this powerful imagery in Hosea chapter 14, verse 6. From the KJV, he promises restoration to the people, saying, "His beauty shall be as the olive tree, and his smell as Lebanon."
True spiritual beauty and the ability to thrive come only from being rightly related to God, planted securely in His presence.
The application here is so direct, and it's guided by the research framework we have. Your spiritual vitality is entirely dependent on being securely planted in God's presence, which we access through faith in Jesus Christ.
And this planting is maintained not by our own perfect momentary performance, but by our continuous trust in His mercy.
The world is full of Doegs, it's full of deceit, it's full of injustice. But we can thrive spiritually, remaining vibrant and green, if we maintain that deep root structure of trusting God's mercy continually.
And so David concludes this psalm with a powerful vow and a declaration, setting the final, enduring tone for the righteous life moving forward, regardless of the immediate circumstances.
Let's hear the full concluding verse, Psalm 52, verse 9. It says, "I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it, and I will wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints." That's Psalm 52, verse 9, KJV.
This verse highlights two essential and I think difficult disciplines of faith: proactive praise and expectant waiting.
He commits to praising God forever, and he speaks with absolute certainty about the future justice, because thou hast done it.
This is a profound praise of faith. He is celebrating God's justice and the destruction of the wicked before it is fully materialized in the historical timeline.
He is praising God, trusting completely in the unseen reality of divine judgment and ultimate victory over evil, rather than waiting for observable evidence.
And the second discipline is his commitment to wait on thy name. And this is far from passive sitting still. It means living in active, expectant hope, trusting completely in the holy character, the reputation, and the nature of God, His name, to act justly and rightly in His perfect timing.
When we are surrounded by devastating injustice, the natural human temptation is to fret, to become instantly impatient, or to take matters into our own hands. But David's model is one of rest and patient waiting.
It's the same instruction found in Psalm 37, verse 7 from the King James Version. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass.
And David concludes by reinforcing that this posture of patient trust, praise, and waiting is good before thy saints.
It's a testimony. It is not only the right thing for the individual believer to do internally, but it serves as a powerful encouragement to the entire community of faith. It shows them the stability of the olive tree is real.
And that leads to our final action step, drawn from the extensive materials supplied to us. This is action step 5. In moments of intense frustration over perceived injustice or the apparent prosperity of the wicked, that thriving mighty man, commit to renewing your commitment to praise God for who he is.
For his unchanging character.
And patiently wait for his timing, recognizing that this public, patient faith is a powerful testimony to others around you, showing them the stability that comes from being rooted in mercy.
And that concludes David's masterful response to Doeg's treachery. It moves so logically and powerfully from the diagnosis of specific evil to the confident declaration of divine judgment, and finally to the demonstration of how a faithful life must be lived in contrast to the world.
We have journeyed through the challenging and rewarding landscape of Psalm 52, contrasting the wicked, destructive power of Doeg's deceitful tongue with the bedrock constancy of God's enduring goodness and eternal mercy.
We have. We've seen a terrifying picture of the wicked man rooted out of the land of the living, consumed by his love for devouring words, and fundamentally flawed because he made not God his strength.
And we've balanced that with the beautiful, enduring counterimage. The believer, like David, planted as a green olive tree in the house of God, sustained forever and ever by mercy, able to praise proactively even when justice is delayed.
Our exploration was really deepened by the comprehensive material supplied by the You Need Faith in Jesus team, which allowed us to draw so much clarity on both consequence and covenant.
The psalm ultimately presents us with one inescapable choice that governs every aspect of our lives. Do you trust in fleeting worldly power, position, and riches, the temporary might of man? Or do you trust in the eternal, unshakable mercy of God, finding your stability in his presence?
And the deeper implication here, which is really worth wrestling with, is the interdependence of mercy and justice. The certainty of judgment described in verse 5 is a necessary guarantee.
How so?
Well, without the explicit promise that God will ultimately pluck up and root out evil, the stability and thriving of the green olive tree would be an illusion. It'll be a temporary peace, subject to the next tyrant.
So it's the guaranteed perfect judgment that ultimately secures the enduring promise of mercy for the righteous.
Exactly.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought, drawing on that razor-sharp focus on communication. If Doeg's tongue was described as a sharp razor and his words as devouring words, what common modern platforms or means of communication think about the virality of outrage, the anonymity of comment sections, or the echo chamber of competitive political rhetoric function as the most powerful devouring words today?
And more importantly, knowing the destructive capacity of that digital razor, how can we, the green olive trees, rooted in faith and committed to health, actively use those same platforms to speak words of health, life, and building up? How do we become agents of mercy in a culture that loves devouring words?
That is the challenge of applying the profound lessons of Psalm 52 in our digital and physical lives, something vital to mull over as you continue your own exploration of this incredible text. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We encourage you to continue rooting your strength, not in your own might, but in the enduring, life-giving mercy of God.